Don and Sue Wilson started CCV over 30 years ago with a handful of people in their living room. Over the years, with Don's preaching, vision, and leadership, CCV has grown to a church averaging over 20,000 in weekly attendance. But that's not what they're most proud about. Don and Sue have raised their kids to love and trust in Jesus Christ. Their son Paul married Paula and is the pastor of a church here in the Valley. Their daughter Kelly married Trent, a pastor who recently started a church in Florida. And their youngest daughter Christy married Chris, an executive pastor of a church in Flagstaff. Don and Sue take great pride in watching their kids pass on godly values to their grandkids. In this series, we invite you into their living room as they share practical insights on leaving a legacy. Hi, and welcome to our brand new series. We're here with Don and Sue Wilson, and the kind of whole idea behind this series is sometimes you see this couple out in the spotlight, but this is kind of the behind the scenes. Well, we're hoping that you can just take some life lessons and really learn to apply these as we go through our everyday lives. And so, guys, I just want to start off by getting right to the subject. We're here talking with you guys about what it's like to leave a legacy. Guys, why don't you just start off by telling us about your upbringing? What was it like in your house growing up? Maybe just take a moment and share that with us.
I grew up in a small town in Kansas, and I was the third child of four. My parents ran a grocery store, the local grocery store, so my summer jobs were working in the store, checking out, stocking shelves, that sort of thing. We grew up in the church. My dad was an elder. My mom was involved with all the activities with the women, and they taught Sunday school. So I grew up very much surrounded by a Christian culture, and church was the center focus of our lives.
How big was the town that you were in growing up?
It was a town of about 3,000.
Okay.
We had a stoplight.
Don, go ahead and tell your story too.
I think most people would know I grew up on a farm. I'm the youngest of five. So we grew up with a very strong work ethic. My brothers and sisters were all involved in 4-H and sports a lot. But the church was really the center of our family. Dad likewise was an elder. My mother played the piano every week for like 50 years. And so we really never missed. That was a real priority. We're involved in the youth group. So when our turn would come for our family to clean the church, we'd all go up as a family and do that because we didn't have janitors or anything, so different families would sign up to do that. So it was really, we saw them serve and lead by example.
So then who would you say then was the spiritual leader in your house? I know you said you were obviously active in church and your dad was an elder, but who was the spiritual leader at home, and how did they influence your faith, I guess?
Both of my parents were leaders, but I was raised in a culture and a time when the man saw his job as to lead. So Dad would have definitely been the spiritual leader. And so he's the one that also, but modeled and led by example. One really unique thing, because our church was so small, we had to share a preacher with two churches. And so we didn't have a preacher on Sunday night or any during the week. And so a lot of older men would go up and study the Bible on Sunday night, and Dad would just take me along when I was 8, 10 years and I'd just sit there, and they'd ask me to read the Bible, and I thought that was pretty cool. But in the whole process, they were modeling godly men for me.
It was pretty much the same for me. My dad was definitely the spiritual leader. My mom looked to him for leading the family, and so it was basically my dad, yeah.
Dennis, probably one thing a little unique with our families, my mother was really the only, I'm going to say, Christian in her family. A lot of alcoholism on her side. My dad had one brother, and there was a lot of alcoholism on that side as well. So anytime we'd get together for family gatherings, reunions, our family really stood out, and we could really see the different lifestyle of our cousins and that sort of thing. And I think your family was a little bit like that.
Similar. My mom was the only girl. She had 6 brothers, and so she grew up with a lot of boys. And some of her brothers were Christians, some were not. But her and my dad made a commitment when they got married that church was going to be a priority for them. They made that decision that they weren't going to, on the weekend, they weren't going to wake up and say, shall we go to church or not? It's just, we're going to go to church. That's going to be our lifestyle. And so that was unique, I think, for both of their families, that church was a commitment that they made every week.
It's obvious that Don and Sue had a lot of key people in their lives that were helping them see who Jesus was. A lot of people that were mentoring them spiritually as they grew up. So why don't we talk about that in our groups for a minute? Who was the spiritual leader in your household? Who really helped shape you and give you the values that you have today? Why don't we talk about that in our groups for the next few minutes? What are some events that shaped you as a kid growing up? One or two episodes from your life in some of your earlier years where you'd say, man, this was pretty crucial to my life growing up.
Well, I remember my parents telling me that you should be careful who you date because you never know who you might end up marrying. I thought that was stupid at the time. I thought it's just a date, what's the point of that? But I started dating a boy when I was in high school that was not a believer and did not have the kind of lifestyle that I was used to. But for some reason, I was attracted to him. And in my best knowledge of what love is, I thought I was in love at that time. And it was a very, very difficult relationship because of his lifestyle and because of the choices that he would make. He would sometimes do things that would make me cry. And it was very tumultuous. I felt like I was in turmoil the whole time that I was dating him. And yet when I would say that I was going to break up with him, he'd say, well, I'll kill myself if you do. That was a heavy thing to drop on somebody. But there was some point when I had to say, do I want to live the rest of my life like this? Because he wanted to get married, and I was still in high school. And I knew I was not ready to get married. And I knew I did not want to live my life in turmoil. So at some point I had to say, I'm going to walk away from this, and if he kills himself, then I can't help it.
Can't control that.
I can't accept that as my responsibility. So I did walk away from that relationship. He ended up marrying a girl right away after she got pregnant, and then they got divorced. And I just, so many times when I look back, I think that could have been me.
Wow.
And I think that God gave me the strength to make that decision because he knew there was something better waiting for me down the road. that I was going to move on with my life in a different direction that would honor him. And if I hadn't made that decision then, I wouldn't be where I am now.
One of the things that shaped my life and my family a lot is when I was 8 years of age. I'm the youngest of 5, as I said. My oldest brother drowned when he was 18 on one Sunday afternoon in a farm pond. And that was traumatic for my family. We didn't talk about it much because I was a young kid, 8 years old. We just carried on. I mean, to tell you how probably it's hard for people to realize this, we milk cows every night and morning. And so my brother died on Sunday afternoon. 2 hours later, we're back milking cows. Next morning, we're milking cows. We go to the funeral, we come back and milk the cows. So we knew that was a part of life and death. My parents taught me, you never know how long you're going to live each day to the fullest. But they really, if I look back, I wish they'd have done a little better of sharing their feelings of what they were going through. But that was a generation where you don't talk about it, you just suck it up and move on. Wow. But that, in many ways, that brought us together as a family. In many ways, that made us reevaluate life and death at a young age. But that was a profound impact on my family and on me as a young kid growing up. And so what I've learned through that is that I would say to people, when you're going through death, divorce, difficult situations in your life, be honest with your kids and talk about it. Because what I've found, kids can deal with it usually easier than the adults can. And if you get the kids talking about it, they will help you as adults work through your grief and your pain as you're talking through that together. And I wish as a family we would have talked about that more.
Wow, and in fact, while we're here talking about events that were key to our lives, let's just talk about that amongst our groups for a minute here. Why don't you go around the circle and just share some of those events from your life early on that were really helpful in shaping you to become the person that you are today. Let's share that for the next few minutes. As you guys were growing up then, obviously you had huge spiritual influence in your household. Parents were highly involved, and so I'm sure you guys were going to church from some of the earliest times you can remember. So then talk to us a little bit about how you met. So you have this spiritual upbringing, and soon your paths cross. So tell us that story.
We both ended up at Manhattan Christian College in Manhattan, Kansas, not by mistake, I don't think, because we both made commitments when we were seniors in high school to give our lives to the Lord. So we met at Manhattan Christian College. The first week of school, we sort of picked each other out from all of the other people that were there. And that was the beginning of a relationship that just kept going.
Yeah, when I saw Sue, she stood out. I mean, she is, I saw the real spiritual qualities, you know. No, she was gorgeous. I mean, okay, I saw the spiritual qualities later. She had black hair down to her waist. Saw her walking over, and I said, man, you know, I want that gal. But I was scared to death because I didn't date much in high school, hardly at all. And so I decided I wanted to ask her out. So I went over to the dormitory one night, the girls' dorm, and I asked her friend to have her come down. And I probably talked to her for, it seemed like forever, probably 20, 30 minutes. I didn't have the guts to ask her out. So that's a side of me most people don't know, okay? And she finally said, do you want to go out with me or not? And I said, yeah, I do. And she said, okay, I'll go with you. So I'm glad she asked me out. This would have never gone any farther.
Now, our first date, Dennis, was with two other couples. So it was a triple date. And so, you know, one couple in the front seat, two couples in the back seat. We were squished in the back seat. And they had been dating for a while. So
Our first date.
Our first date was they drove out somewhere and parked the car. And we were sitting there looking at each other like, well, do we do what they're doing, or what do we do now?
So I went to Christian college to park. I had never parked till I went to Christian college. And yeah, four of us were in the back. We kind of looked at each other like this. She kissed me. That's the last thing I remember. That's the last thing I remember. But I just thought, man, I'm glad I'm going to Christian college. This is awesome. This is awesome.
Yeah, that also crushes the stereotype most people have of a Christian college. So that's great. Yeah, send your kids to a Christian school. How about that? That's awesome. Well, then,
we prayed before we kissed.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay,
yeah.
That's good.
Not really. Okay. But I prayed afterwards. Thank you, Lord.
So yeah, thank you, God. Thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So got married in school, still in school then, and then tell us about those early years then of marriage and ministry and school and all that.
She was 19 when she got married. I was 20, and when we got married, I was playing college basketball. She was a cheerleader. We had a church on the weekends that we went to and preached. And she was working a part-time job. I was taking 18 hours and also working a trash route. So we were cranking, you know, but we didn't know any different. So God was good.
And then I got pregnant. And so I had to quit my job. And well, I didn't have to quit my job, but I did quit my job because we made a decision that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. So as soon as our first baby was born, I was at home with the baby.
When we graduated, we had a full-time church, and we were there for a year. It was a great experience. We got paid $100 a week, full-time, and we tithed. And God just really blessed us. We'd have times that we'd have food left on our front door from church members, and God just took care of all our needs. It was a great experience. Went back to the school for 4 years, worked in public relations and coached. And then we came to Phoenix in 1975 with two little kids. First time we'd ever been away from all of our relatives and all of our family. Probably the biggest adjustment for us, I think, in coming to Arizona is a culture shock. We'd never been in a big city. We'd never been in a big church. Big church, it was 800. But in 1975, 800 was a big church, okay? And so it took us about a year to adjust, I'd say, to the culture of Arizona. And so I was a youth minister there for 4 years, finished my doctorate in theology, then went to a church of 200, was the senior pastor. They were meeting in a double-wide trailer, and we grew that church from 200 to 700 in 3 years. They decided to start a new church, and so my wife and I decided we'd go for it, and that's where I got a great wife. I came home and said, hey, honey, I think we're going to go for it, and We didn't have any money guaranteed or anything. And she just said, if God's in it, it'll work. And so a lot of the success of our ministry has just been because she's always stood behind me and believed in me.
Now, when you guys, that was some of the early days then, and you have a family this whole time. So you've got a couple kids.
3 little kids then.
And, making those adjustments from at work and everything. So talk to us about how you guys then prioritized God in your family as you started to raise your own family.
Well, our kids are no different than any other kids. They would come home and say, I don't want to go to church, But our response was always, it doesn't matter. Whether you want to go to church, we're going to church. And you need to be involved in your Sunday school class and in your youth group. And if you don't like what's going on, then you talk to your leader about it and give some suggestions for how things might be changed, because it's your group. So they just never had the option of not going. That was our priority. They had to be there.
So kids that resist going to church, that's normal. That's
Yeah.
normal behavior. Happens in preachers' households too.
Sure.
And we led by example. I mean, if they say, I don't want to go to school, we didn't say, okay, why don't you stay home today? You made a commitment, you follow through on it. And so we were always, like she said, if you don't like what's going on, be a change agent, don't be a complainer. Get in there and make things happen. Yep. And so that was more of our input. We never told our kids, you're a pastor's kid, so you got to act this way. We're Wilsons. We established Wilsons have values. One of our values was put Christ first, but we never said, you're a preacher kid, you can't act that way. We do this because we're Wilsons. We will stand alone, whatever, because these are our values.
As we're talking about leaving a legacy, guys, I think one of the central themes of this whole deal is that faith isn't taught as much as it is caught. And so as you raised your kids to love and trust in Jesus Christ, how did you model that to your kids as you passed down those values to them?
I think there's a couple things, and one thing that how we're so blessed again is because we lived in Arizona, probably once a year we'd go back to Kansas to see parents. Well, what was great was, Dennis, when we would go to visit her parents or my parents, the grandparents also left the legacy of putting church first. Okay. So they saw the grandparents living it out and encouraging them and praying for them and what they were doing. And so then the same thing with us. It wasn't like they saw a disconnect or a different image or a different standard from grandparents to parents. We continued that legacy started by our parents.
Okay, so the inputs they were having, even outside their immediate family, their distant relatives and things like that, were kind of reinforcing the values that you had.
Right, because even if we got together for family reunions in Kansas, it always centered around church.
Okay.
We'd go to my little country church, for example, had 100 people, 50 of them would be our family. And so our family would be up front. They'd see Grandpa and Grandma up front leading and so on. So that legacy continued.
We felt it was important that our kids learn how to live in the real world. We didn't want them to be sheltered and then at some point they're bombarded with all the world's stuff. So we tried to make our lives as real as possible, as much like everybody else's lives as we could, and still have it based on biblical values. So there were times when we would watch TV shows that had stuff in it that some people might not want their kids to see. But when those things came up, we talked about it. We would say, well, for instance, beer commercials. Don would say, son, they don't show that guy getting in his car and crashing or going home and beating his wife. Yeah. So just because they make beer look like it's a good thing, it's not always a good thing when you abuse it. Or, a show where a couple decides to have sex, we would have talks about the consequences of those decisions. So that when those kinds of issues came up in their lives, they had a point of reference about the other side of that stuff. So you don't always just act on impulse. You think about the consequences of your actions. Yeah. So that was something I think that we worked hard to do, is to make sure that they could live in the real world and make the right decisions.
Dennis, I think sometimes if we have a bad experience in life, we tend to want to have our kids avoid that. But if we have a good experience, sometimes we want our kids to also have a chance to have that same experience. And so one of the things that I think I learned, Yes, I went to a Christian college to train to be a pastor, but the most important decision I made going to Manhattan Christian College was to marry a Christian spouse. And I think where a lot of parents make a mistake today, they're way more concerned when they send their kids away to college. What academic status does it have? What major are you going to major in? Statistics say that people change their careers 5 times. Okay. Hopefully, you don't change your spouse. And so I believe the most important thing that totally Christian parents miss is they need to send their kids to an environment where they have a better chance of getting a Christian spouse. Because that's the most important thing for our family is the fact that we're both believers and we're together in this. Because if we weren't, I wouldn't have been in ministry. And our kids would not have had a chance to grow up in a godly family if if we were unequally yoked, one wanted to be a Christ follower and one didn't. So again, I think the most important thing, choose a college because that's where they're usually going to find their life mate.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, choosing a college where they're just as concerned, if not more concerned, about their character development than their academic achievements or what have you. So,
right.
Yeah,
so we encourage our kids to go to Christian college. The best thing is they found a Christian spouse. Yeah. I will encourage all my grandkids to go there because if they can find a Christian spouse, that's the best use of their income to go to college that they'll ever receive.
Absolutely. Obviously, today we're talking about the importance of leaving a legacy, about setting a good example for those around you. For the next few minutes, we'd like to have your group read these passages and then press play when you're ready to continue. It's obvious that faith isn't taught as much as it's caught. And those passages indicate that. And so here's a couple questions we'd like for you to discuss in light of what you just finished reading. What are some things that you hope others are catching from the example that you're setting? And let's talk about this. What is a legacy that you hope that you're leaving on those around you? Talk about those 2 questions for the next few minutes. Tell us a little bit about, things right now are going really well. Your kids love the Lord. They are raising their kids to do the same. They're involved with ministry and highly involved in the churches they're serving at. For a lot of people, though, it doesn't turn out that way. It's not that pristine, if you will. So what would you say to the person that's watching this and they're discouraged because maybe they've made some mistakes that have cost them relationships, or there's been some things in their family's history, like you mentioned how it wasn't just something that was central to your household, but even to your relatives as well. A lot of people that they can't relate with that. So what advice or encouragement would you give to someone they feel like they're swimming upstream when it comes to leaving a legacy or setting a good example in the household?
I'd say one thing, don't be afraid to let your kids fail. Okay. This last year has been really tough on our family. Paul and Paula starting the restaurant and the church, I mean, they went through a really difficult time, invested their life savings in that, and sometimes when your kids go through tough times, the danger is we want to step in and bail them out, and if we do, they don't learn anything. Trent and Kelly moving to Florida, first time we've had our family separated in Florida, going to a new church. It's a tough time for them right now. Or Chris and Christy going to Flagstaff, and there's a different climate in Flagstaff versus Phoenix, and so there's an adjustment there. So I think when your kids go through struggles, don't be afraid to let them fail, because if you bail them out, they're never going to learn. That would be one thing that I would say, because they're all going to make mistakes. We made mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. It's a part of growing up and maturing.
One of the most important things to do when you make mistakes is to admit it, because your kids need to hear you say, "I'm sorry, I blew it." And that teaches them that it's okay to make mistakes. You just have to apologize for it and move on, because I think sometimes parents know they've made a mistake, but they just keep pushing through like they're still right, and the kids know they're not right. So we learned that we can apologize to our kids and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I think it's also important for people to realize that you could do everything right, which most people don't, but you could do everything right and still have something go wrong. Sure. Because kids have free will.
Absolutely.
And sometimes they make choices that you don't want them to make. So at some point, you have to say, I did what God told me to do. I taught my kid what God told me to teach him, and it's up to them now. And you have to realize that God loves them more than you do, and He's going to be with them. So the thing is, people tend to beat themselves up for their kids' choices, and you can't, because it's their choices.
That's true.
Yeah, and they're going to be kids the rest of your life. And so if we're not careful, if our kids in their 40s make a decision that we disagree with, like she said, we got to turn that over to God. If not, we're going to go to the grave feeling guilty. Oh, look at how we messed up. If we hadn't have done that, that probably wouldn't have caused that. So again, we were not helicopter parents. We released them, let them go. They're in God's hands.
It's obvious that Dawn and Sue have talked a lot about some of the successes that they've had in raising their kids to love and trust in Jesus, and then also some of the mistakes that they've made and the lessons that they've learned along the way. I think that's something that we can all relate with. So why don't we discuss these next two questions together as a group? What are some things that you feel that you've done right as you've set a good example to those around you? And what are some things areas maybe that you made some mistakes, some things that you would like to go back and change? Let's talk about those two questions together for the next few moments. let's get off the page here for just a little bit, have some fun. Sue, what are the keys to living with Don?
He's not home much.
That's why we have a good relationship. I'm not home much. Yeah.
I think it's just, it's just like I said, with any couple, God wants you to make your spouse look good, to build up their strengths and to be whatever it is they need you to be. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, we got to compliment each other instead of competing. And yet there was a time a few years ago in the church where I was doing about 3 nights going this way, and she was 3 nights going this way, because she's never been paid in the church. She's been a full-time staff person but never got a dollar. So she was doing about 3 nights this way, and I was going 3 nights this way. And even though we were all working for the church with everything we got, it was pulling us apart. And we had to stop and say, whoa, what's going on? And basically she stepped down from some things, again, to honor me and say, to help support me in my ministry. And we had to sit down and reevaluate our schedule so we could spend some time together. That's one of the things that I really love about neighborhood groups. A lot of churches, they have women's Bible studies, men's Bible studies. Neighborhood group is the one time every week where I get to hear my wife share spiritual insights and hear her heart, and she gets to hear my heart. And I think a lot of couples can go to Bible studies, they can go to different Bible studies for men and women, and you say, how come they got a divorce? Because they never heard each other share the spiritual issues of their heart. Women were sharing with women, men with men. And I think that is a real value of the neighborhood groups that sometimes we miss. We get to connect spiritually every week through the group, whether we realize it or not.
Guys, since we're talking about leaving a legacy, then what would you say is the key to the legacy that you will leave on this life?
Well, I think everybody has to sit down and look at their purpose and look at their priorities and say, what is the impact I want to make? God's blessed my wife and I with the opportunity to lead a great church. I've had the opportunity to train pastors and leaders locally and literally around the world. But if you would ask me what is the most important legacy for me to leave, it's that all my kids know Jesus, all my grandkids know Jesus, and hopefully if I'm still alive, my great-grandkids love Jesus. That is the most important legacy for me. It's not my career, it's my family.
You talk about what you want to be written on your tombstone. I don't think we want to, that to say, they built a great church. We want it to say they love the Lord. So that's our legacy.
Yeah, and then if our grandkids and kids grow up and love the Lord, that's it. Because the Bible says what? Seek first His kingdom, not my career. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and He'll take care of everything else.
We had challenges with each one of them in different ways, and we had to learn how to meet those challenges in a way that would make them stronger and not push them over the edge.
Yeah, and that's what's so neat now being a grandparent, because now that I know this, I can observe the love language or the personality of the grandkids, and hopefully we're smarter than we were as parents. So it's a learning experience. And again, you're going to make mistakes. Nobody has a perfect family. Our family was not perfect. Our family is not perfect. And so you're going to make mistakes. Trust God, hang in there, and do the best you can.
One of the helpful things from this experience is just being able to learn from other families that are going through very similar circumstances to our own. And so as we get ready to conclude tonight's study, let's just talk about some of the things that we learned from Don and Sue. What were some things that you found helpful or insightful as you pass down values and as you leave a legacy to those around you? Let's talk about that as we close.
Isn't it great to hear from Don and Sue from behind the scenes? I hope your group had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the both of them. What a great couple. Neighborhood Ministries is all about building intentional relationships with those in our group, all our CCV neighbors, and our unchurched neighbors. You know, just a few weeks ago, we had hundreds of block parties all over the valley to intentionally get to know and build friendships. Here are just a few pictures that we received over the last few weeks. Please keep reaching out to those neighbors closest to you. They are those God has strategically placed around us so we can know and serve them. You and your group are representing Christ and CCV in our neighborhoods. Great job. Did you know that there are almost 8,000 of us meeting in nearly 500 neighborhood groups all over the valley? But here's something you may not know. There are nearly 20,000 CCV members and attendees not in a group. We want to get to know them too, and in true CCV fashion, we want to do this in a big way. Sunday, April 28th, we're going to connect with as many other CCV people as we can in connection events all over the valley, and we are asking each neighborhood group to help us accomplish this great opportunity. We want every group to host a connection event specifically designed to get to know the CCV people in their neighborhood. This is not to get them to group. This is simply to get to know them. We want to build these relationships so that regardless of whether they are in a neighborhood group or not, we get to know each other so we can support and serve each other. On Sunday afternoon, April 28th, we are going to invite all CCV members and attendees to a simple dessert in their neighborhood hosted by your group. So how do we do this? There's a simple answer. These people are already listed for your group leader in the leadership toolbox under invitation list. You know, for some of you, it's 10 to 20 people. For others, this list could be 100 or more. This means that your group will need to plan accordingly. Some of you can simply do a dessert at your home. Others will need a park or maybe even a stadium. Okay, maybe not a stadium, but you get the point. We want you to personally invite every person on your invitation list. If your group is small, have one person, maybe the nicest or the best organized, the best on the phone, make that call or send the invitations. If you have a large list, divide it up and everyone take 5 or 10 calls and invite those folks. On the weekend before and the weekend of our connection events, our teaching team and campus pastors will announce this opportunity on all 3 campuses and invite people to respond to your invitation, or they can go online, type their address, and then they will be directed to the location your group has chosen for your connection event dessert. Thank you all for making this happen. Thank you for being on the front lines and making a difference in our neighborhoods for Jesus.